This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources families and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This show is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Here's your host, Trevor Sheeran.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. I'm Trevor Sheeran, joined as always by Dr. Mark Mayfield. And today, we realized that we had never done a full episode on boundaries.
How many episodes have we done?
Too many?
Yeah.
To not have done this conversation. Like, we touched on it in some of the early episodes talking about safe people and safe places.
Sure.
But this is a really, key element of a lot of your talking points when you go to speak to groups
and counseling,
and we have just failed to talk about it. Maybe we talk about it so much that we just
thought we
didn't realize we didn't talk about it here.
So we're talking about boundaries today. Sorry, people. You might roll your eyes, but how many of you actually know what your boundaries are or what boundaries are?
Yeah.
I mean, I have worked with some of the most intelligent people in my counseling sessions, and I bring up this term boundaries, and they're like, huh?
Right.
What are you talking about?
And I think most commonly, the idea of boundaries is just, that's, you don't do that.
Right.
Okay, you don't do what? Things that are outside of your boundaries? Okay, what
is that?
What are those?
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think we noticed this too when we came up with our Who Can Relate curriculum, asking teens, who loves you? Or what does love mean? Seems like a really easy concept, but as soon as you have to speak out what it means and give a definition, it becomes really hard.
Right.
And I think boundaries are exactly the same. We think we understand what a boundary is, and then when we're asked to describe it or to explain what it means,
So if you decide to go run across the border of Colorado and Wyoming on the road,
yeah,
would anything happen?
I would probably run into a few yucca plants.
Maybe. But if you're on the road,
if I'm on the road, nothing.
Right?
Absolutely nothing.
So boundary, but really nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
But what if you were to run across the border of Canada and America on the road?
Pretty sure the Canadian Patrol or whatever.
The Mounties.
The Mounties would get me.
Yeah. I mean, they either taser you, they chase after you, they might pellet gun you or whatever, because that was a boundary that you shouldn't have crossed without what?
Permission.
Right. So Wyoming, Colorado,
Yeah.
Right. Canadians are nice, so they might pellet gun you or taser you,
right,
or
yeah.
Tell you stuff.
They may not tase me for the full time.
Try running across the border of Mongolia into Russia. Yeah, you might not walk away. Right. Yeah.
So are you saying that there are different boundaries?
Wow, you're perceptive. Well, yes, but we don't ever think about that. Right? We don't ever think about, so what would happen if somebody in Colorado, what happens if somebody walks into your house that you don't know uninvited?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in our state law, we have the Make My Day law where I have the right to
protect my family
by whatever means necessary.
Right.
And also that for our culture in Colorado, that would be vastly inappropriate because not even my friends, there are two friends of mine that I allow to walk into my house without having me let them in.
Yes. I don't have anybody. Well, yeah, good friends, but it's push the doorbell,
exactly.
Make sure everything's together. And so it's this idea of permission, I think, is a big deal. But there are different types of boundaries that we don't often think about until they're crossed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you and I talk about this all the time in our talks, and there's different ways of looking at them. We could look at them in concentric circles. We could look at them as, line markations of a fence or fence posts, the Great Wall of China, a wall, or the way I look at healthy boundaries is this idea of a baseball backstop chain link fence, right? It's high, pretty hard to scale. There's a movement that can go through it, communication that can go through it, and there's a gate that you can enter into when invited, right? So, but you think about the majority of our culture has either the fence post boundary, like the Wyoming boundary, or the Russia boundary,
Yeah. It's
Right.
one or the other. It's kind of extreme.
So are any of those wrong though?
So the counselor side of me says no.
Right.
I'm going to go into the pre-counselor me and say that walls are always bad, and we're supposed to be able to let people in.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the typical, I can't put walls up because for some reason they're bad. But you think about it, if somebody in your life, and especially we think about family, friends, I think, if you have friends and they've hurt you numerous times, you can wash your hands of the relationship and move on. But if it's family that continues to offend, a wall is actually not a bad thing.
Right.
Because think about it, boundaries are for who?
You.
Not everybody else.
Yeah.
Boundaries are for your own sanity, for your own protection, for your own guidance. And I was sitting and talking with somebody the other day going, you need to figure out what your boundaries are and establish them. And as you enforce those boundaries, you have the potential of ticking a lot of people off.
Yeah.
But it's not about them, it's about you. And
Totally.
that in our culture feels
Wrong.
odd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, there is a sense of humbly accepting that this is an important aspect of your life and recognizing walls have a purpose.
Yeah.
So do fence posts.
Yep.
So does that baseball backstop. They all have their purposes. So if we were to break it down into what purpose is served by each of those three boundaries,
Sure.
what would they be?
When you think about a fence post, basically it's just to mark where the boundary is. Just like Wyoming. It's nice to know where the state line is.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because when I cross the state line, the way Wyoming does government life is going to be different than Colorado, but it's not so vastly different that I better pick up one of their rule books and read through it. We're still in the United States of America, so and so I think the fence post has a place in a healthy family where it's like, okay, I'm talking to mom right now, not dad. And they're under the same roof, the same family, and if they have a healthy relationship, then I know that I'm going to get a different personality, maybe a different flavor, but it's the same.
But I know that I can say a swear word in front of my dad once and be okay, but if I say it to my mom, she's gonna have some consequences.
Right. So it's just,
for that.
I think, some different ways of doing things, and I think fence posts are okay in the context of the overarching healthy relationships. I almost, in some ways, in a healthy family, I see fence posts boundaries as a way of operating within a broader spectrum of a backstop or a wall, right? So where a wall, I think, is very much protective. You think about what the Great Wall of China was built for and why it's still standing, and you can still see it from space. And it was a way of protecting China or parts of China from the rest of the world during. How old is that thing? It's
old,
almost a couple thousand years old, right? So I think a wall is important for protection. So I think about my house in some ways being the wall. We have a security system. We've got cameras. We've got doors that lock. We have windows that lock. We have rules of engagement if you want to enter in. And maybe that's more of an example of a backstop where I think maybe a wall is, okay, that person's hurt me consistently, and so
I'm blocking them on Instagram. I'm blocking them on Facebook. I'm not going to the places that they usually go.
Or if they're family, I'm going to say, okay, we'll see you at Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter at my house or at mom and dad's house or whatever, and I'm going to engage you in a certain way, but that's as far as I'm going. Yeah. So I think walls are okay. I think a lot of times we use walls to keep everybody out, which is not healthy. But then I think the backstop is kind of like I was saying about my house. It's people are invited over, but they're invited over, and I've got protections. I've got a security system. I've got a camera. I've got doors that lock. I've got those kinds of things, and I think that's the best way to look at it because it's me controlling how I engage with the world as best as possible, and then what my requirements of you are if you want to engage with me. I don't know. There's a great book called Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. It's older. Yeah, it probably was written in the 90s, but there's revised versions, and these guys are fantastic. and kind of updating the content. So
yeah, I grew up in the time of the I Kiss Dating Goodbye,
I'm sorry.
the now debunked.
Well, to be fully honest, I mean, we did too.
Right. And so I grew up with books like Boundaries in Dating, Boundaries in Marriage, and this concept of like accountability and boundaries on your internet use. And boundaries were really used as the don't do this or the don'ts.
Versus the protective.
Right.
Yeah.
Versus where I see it now is more of the permissions,
right.
more of the allowances. Like I could do anything, but I want to give permission to my wife to do things that are really meaningful to our relationship, where she can call me out on things, or she can interrupt what I'm doing because she's important.
Right.
And I want my best friend to have some of that, but not all of it.
Right.
And so his permissions are going to be a little bit different. And then
with the internet piece too, right? So we look at protections on the internet as boundaries to maintain relationship, healthy relationship, right? So it's a the permissions piece I think is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having a good view of what boundaries are can make a world of difference, because boundaries are hard. Like there's no doubt that boundaries are hard.
Yep.
But they aren't bad.
No. And I think that's where we get guilted into thinking that they're bad. When I hold a boundary with you and you're offended because you don't get it,
right,
or you don't have boundaries yourself, that's not my responsibility.
Yeah.
Now, it might be, as a friend, it might be my responsibility to walk you through it, to talk you through it. But I'm not going to change my boundary because you're offended.
Right. Nor should you, even if I lash out or try to push other boundaries or engage with you in a way that is more inappropriate because I'm upset that you're doing this.
Right.
It shouldn't change. And maybe it does affect how you're setting up those boundaries, in that maybe I go from the fence post to a backstop and then from a backstop to a wall because of the way I'm reacting. And I think that speaks to something you talk about often, is that these change.
Right. They don't have to stay static.
Yeah.
Right.
So day to day, hopefully it stays very consistent with our relationship if it's healthy. But there may be some relationships, like with family, where we're kind of stuck, where I have to evaluate maybe week to week where I'm letting this person enter.
I often think that you need to understand your general style. If you're more geared towards putting up walls, you need to be aware of that. If you're more geared towards the fence post, you need to be aware of that. I think in a healthy framework, that backstop chain link fence visual is probably the best place for us to call home base.
It's pretty balanced.
It's balanced. And from that balanced position, we can create fence posts, we can create walls. But it's so much harder to go from a fence post to a wall, or a fence post to even a chain link fence, right?
Totally.
But it's easier to maybe tear down a piece of the chain link fence and have some fence posts, or build up a part of the chain link fence with a wall.
And it can be hard the other way too. I know that I've noticed in my own family, my family is not very physical with each other. Like I don't hug my sisters very often. And when I do, it's a very brief encounter.
Sure.
If I was to fully embrace one of my siblings, it would feel really inappropriate because that's not how the relationship has been.
Right.
And it's more of that wall, but it's recognizing like, okay, this is uncomfortable, but maybe it's really meaningful because my sisters need their older brother to show some affection towards them. And so I think either way, it can be really uncomfortable to change a relationship norm.
Sure. And it's generational and all those kind of things, which is funny because your family is very loving.
Very.
But the physical affection piece is, I think that's that cultural norms, it's family norms and that kind of stuff. Babe, you make a good point of going, how do we adjust based on, who we're with and But I think it's if you don't have a framework, if you don't have a home base, all of this kind of seems probably scary.
Yeah.
So where do you start?
I think it's a great idea. And I think the first place to start is with reflecting.
Sure. Sorry, guys. We do this all the time.
Yeah.
Reflect and be aware of your own stuff.
Keep coming back to it. If you have trouble reflecting, maybe go to a counselor. The other recommendation that we always have.
But there's true, I mean, or work with a friend or a mentor or anybody that can help you figure that out. But it's interesting just how many people, well-meaning people, intelligent people, people that are successful, that don't have an understanding of boundaries or their boundaries.
Yep. And it can be dangerous.
Yeah.
Like if my doors were always open in my house and I always left the garage door open and I left things out for anybody to come in and grab, that would be a dangerous and precarious place to be.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, exactly. And I think I was sitting last Friday with a very successful leader, and when I say successful, and it's not just talking about monetary or anything like that, but Dr. Wes Stafford from Compassion, he led the company. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was with the company for almost 50 years, led it as the president for 20 years, and I asked him the question. I said, "So, how do you finish well?" And he kind of smiled and he goes, and he's and Compassion's a Christian organization. He's a believer. And he said, if you look at the Bible, he goes, there's 1,000 leaders mentioned and only 50 finished well. And so we talked about how do you finish well? And it's this conversation. It's the awareness. It's the idea of knowing your boundaries. It's being teachable. It's having people speak into those things. One of the things he goes is you pre-fight your battles. Meaning sit down with your spouse and go, what things are coming down the road as we get more successful, as we grow our family, as we deal with family, as we do all these kind of things, and begin to pre-fight battles that maybe haven't shown up yet. Yeah. But it's what it is it's setting boundaries, going, okay, if this happens, here's how we're going to respond. If this happens, here's how we're going to respond. And he goes, most leaders that get into the spotlight from a faith perspective probably have never done that, and there's not there's well-meaningness.
Totally,
it's not even a word. Well-meaning.
But the path to hell is paved with good intention.
Right, exactly. And so they've never thought through boundaries or no, I'm not going to do this or do that because of this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And then they get. I mean, you can think of, and sadly, how many scandals over the last 3 decades among people that had good intentions.
Yeah, but poor boundaries.
Right? So I think, again, like our episode last week, it's never too late.
Yeah.
It's never too late to sit down and figure out boundaries. It's never too late to reevaluate those boundaries. It's never too late to go, oh, I've never even thought of this concept before. Let's put these things into practice.
Yep. And it may not be fun. It probably won't be easy, but it will be good.
Yes, and good and easy don't have to be in the same sentence.
They don't?
Yep. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, candid@mayfieldcounseling.com, 719-452-4803. You can put a comment on the Facebook page or our YouTube channel if you have any questions, and we'll put some resources. We'll put some of the books we've talked about today and any other resources we might have to begin this process. But it's good.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, you can email candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or call 719-452-4803.